Oh, it's cold today. I'm going to warm up my hands with some tea. Right, I'm going to do my monthly wrap-up and see how we're doing. Welcome to my channel, by the way. Thanks for coming. I appreciate you. Right, 3 books this month. 3 books. Take a sip of tea first. This is Darjeeling from the tea box. Right, so first of all, we've got Chimes of a Lost Cathedral by Janet Fitch, which I don't need to go into here because I've already recorded a review of it. So you can check that out if you want to know what it's about. But in brief, it's a historical novel based on the Russian Revolution, and it follows the life of Marina Makarova, Marina M. This is the first book in the duology. She's a young poet in Soviet Petrograd, and we follow her life through the revolution in book 1 and then the aftermath in book 2 into the Civil War. And I mean, boy oh boy, what an adventure. So I won't say any more than that. I'll just say I loved it, and I gave it, did I give it 5 stars? I think I did. I think I gave both of them 5 stars because I loved them so much. So if you want to know more about these, check out my review video. Whichever side those things go up, I can't remember. Right, next up, you've probably heard me talk about Inanna by Emily H. Wilson. Yes, that's Emily H. Wilson, and not Emily Wilson. This one is by Emily Wilson, translated by, and that's a different person. So I only say that because I mixed them up, and I'm sure other people have. And I went to meet Emily H. Wilson thinking she was Emily Wilson when I was at Worldcon. And I was like, hi, how are you? I've just bought your Odyssey translation. She's like, no, that wasn't me. I'm Emily H. Wilson. So embarrassed as I was like, right, I'm going to get Emily H. Wilson's books. So I did. I bought Inanna and I bought the sequel Gilgamesh, which are the first 2 in a trilogy called The Sumerians. This was fabulous, like nothing I've ever read before. Follows 3 main characters, one of whom, of course, is Inanna, and she's a high goddess. She's one of the Anunnaki. In fact, she's the 13th of 12 Anunnaki, so make of that what you will. She's born at the beginning, and the high god An comes to visit her and places on her wrist a me, M-E-E, which is some kind of magic talisman that the gods use. So we follow her story through the book in conjunction with the other 2 main characters, who are Gilgamesh, the title of the second book. So that tells you that Gilgamesh survives. And he's a warrior, son of gods, but not a god himself. He's a mortal. And we follow his journey as he traverses through the land, going to different cities, getting up to hijinks, fighting. And we follow a friend of his, which is one of my favourites, is Enkidu. I just love that word, Enkidu. So we follow them as they travel around and they get up to different adventures. So I don't want to spoil it much more than that. And then the third character, Ninshubar. Ninshubar is a young warrior girl who gets kicked out of her tribe because she adopts a waif, a stray, who appears in their midst, called the Potter. So she gets kicked out of her tribe. In fact, her tribe are going to kill her. So she runs away with her adopted son, the Potter, and they end up travelling the land as well, being pursued to begin with, and then they eventually, the stories all intertwine from about halfway through the book. And It's an interesting adventure. It's based on the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I hadn't heard of before, so it's all new to me, following the ancient Sumerian texts. And the way that Emily H. Wilson has brought these characters to life was just quite incredible. It was a very fast-paced book. It doesn't go into great depth, and we seem to span quite a large chunk of time through the book. And that's okay, you know. I found myself getting a little bit confused at the beginning because of the 3 point of views. They're all done in the first person. Lots of strange names and strange places. So, I mean, that's just how it is whenever I start any kind of fantasy book, which, in a sense, this is. It's kind of sci-fi, fantasy, epic, ancient text. It's quite difficult to pin down, actually, into a genre, but obviously Worldcon, which is the science fiction and fantasy conference, festival. I don't know what its proper title is. I can't remember, but they obviously thought that it qualified to have Emily H. Wilson at the conference to launch the second book, Gilgamesh. So I loved it. I think I gave it 4 stars. I did have to go through some of it again and reread parts I'd already read because, as I said, the confusion I had at the beginning. But that's okay now. I think I can dive into Gilgamesh without any fear of having to do that again. But it did reward going through it. I read the Ninshu point of view chapters again, which was enough to get me going into the second half of the book. Ninshu was my favourite character. Her story arc was, it's quite incredible and fun. So, recommend this book if you're looking for something a wee bit different from the usual fantasy tropes, then, recommend it. So that was that. Next up was a non-fiction book. And some of you will know that I have a bit of a thing about Russian history and Russian politics, Soviet history, Soviet politics. And so I picked this one up when I was in Brighton in Oxfam for £2.99. All the Kremlin's Men by Mikhail Zygar. And Mikhail Zygar is a journalist, and he worked on a TV company called TV Rain, Dodged. And I think that channel got taken off the air after the special operation, after the invasion of Ukraine. So that kind of gives you an idea of Mikhail Zygar's politics, I suppose. I don't know if he had skin in the game as far as the channel's concerned, with stakes, I don't know, but yeah. So he's well known in Russia. I don't know if he's still in Russia. This came out in 2014, so, we're already 10 years behind in the story of Putin. Let me just double check that. I'm pretty sure it's 2014. Might be 2016. What does it say here? 2016. Apologies, it was 2016. But we're still quite far behind in terms of the story. But it does go into what went down in 2014 with the Crimea. So, maybe that's why I had 2014 in my head. That's a big part in the story of the current situation in Russia, what went down 2014. And before that, with the Maidan Orange Revolutions. So, it talks with different characters in the Russian political landscape. So each chapter really talks about different people, different politicians or different oligarchs. So here I've written, this is the best explanation of the loans for shares scheme that I've read. So this is on page 54. The loans for shares scheme, if you don't know, was when Yeltsin did the privatisation thing just after the wall came down and we got into the wild west of capitalism in Russia under Yeltsin in the 90s, and he sold off state-owned or previously state-owned companies, giving out shares, and it became a big part of the corruption of how the oligarchs made their money. So in essence, the locals, anyone could buy shares. I think shares were actually issued to everyone, but because people were struggling to make ends meet, to buy food and to keep the heating on and all of that, they ended up selling their shares at a fraction of their value to the oligarchs, who were quite happily going around giving out money to buy up these shares, and so they ended up with these companies for a fraction of their value. So that was kind of how the oligarchs came into being, and that's what's explained here on page 54, chapter 3. And yeah, I mean, it follows the politics. It does talk a bit about Berezovsky, one of the oligarchs, and the role that he played in bringing Putin into power as president, and then how Putin backstabbed all of these oligarchs that helped him come to power. So I don't know if it's not really pro or anti-Putin, the way that this book is written. It's setting out facts, giving details of some of the street protests that took place, how they were put down. It talks about Chechnya, goes into detail on that, about the Ramzan Kadyrov, how his father was assassinated when he was president of Chechnya, and how Ramzan Kadyrov became president. I think he was 19. He's a young man anyway. And that was a big part of the story as well. I mean, it's a complex story. There are many books have been written about it. I've read quite a few of them, and I'm still really trying to understand Russian politics and history. It's just such an incredibly complex story, and it's still going on. I love the end of the book and the conclusion, the way he finishes it, which I'll just read out to you because it rings true. I think it's something that will help you understand a little bit, because of all of the people that are involved, all the politicians, all the backstabbing, all the corruption, the whole thing. We end up with this. It said that today's image of Putin as a formidable Russian Tsar was constructed by his entourage, Western partners and journalists, often without his say. In one of the most famous photographs there is of Putin, he has the mien of a haughty ruler, the military emperor of the world. But that is not Putin himself, merely Time magazine's 2007 Person of the Year staring out from the cover. Each of us invented our own Putin, and we may yet create many more. And since this came out, we have, of course, created other versions of Putin. Putin the warmonger, Putin the invader, Putin the conqueror. So I enjoyed the book. It was easy to read, but do read it with a notebook, and because of all the names, and there is a glossary at the front, which is very helpful, which gives a list of the names in the book of all the people that are mentioned and who they are, with a brief summary. So that's a very helpful addition to the book. List of characters. And the 4 parts, it's split into 4 parts. Putin the Lionheart, Putin the Magnificent, Prince Dmitri, and Putin the Terrible. So there we go. I think I gave it 4 stars. Yeah, pretty sure I gave it 4. So that's my wrap. 3 books this month. I'm getting behind a bit on my Odyssey, which I'm hoping to pick up again as we go into October. So I'm not going to start any more history books or politics books. I'm going to catch up on my Odyssey read-along, which I'm doing as part of my slow read over on my Substack, following Ted Gioia's my screens went off. Following Ted Gioia's Humanities List. So I've got that. There's another copy of the Odyssey. That's my travel copy because it's nice and floppy. Same translation, Emily H. Wilson. Of course I meant Emily Wilson, no Emily H. Wilson. See how easy it is. Because, as I mentioned in a previous video, I'm struggling a wee bit with imposter syndrome. Overthinking videos, that kind of thing. Overthinking articles that I want to write about Plato, which I'm behind on. So this book here is just such a helpful little book. How to break through the blocks and win your inner creative battles. So just pick a random extract. She gets an agent, she gets a lawyer, she gets an accountant. She knows she can only be a professional at one thing. She brings in other pros and treats them with respect. That's not that great an example, actually. Let's pick this one. Resistance cannot be seen, touched, heard, or smelled, but it can be felt. We experience it as an energy field radiating from a work in potential. It's a repelling force. It's negative. Its aim is to shove us away, distract us, prevent us from doing our work. Yes, I can relate to that wholeheartedly. So I'm reading that to help me through. And also on the go is this amazing fantasy book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is a reread for me. I first read it in 2009, so obviously I've forgotten pretty much everything about it. And I'm reading it with Ross and Laura from Hardy's Books as part of their read-along that they're doing in September and October, which is out on the Fable platform. So if you look up Hardy's Books on Fable, you'll find their read-along for this. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm listening to the audiobook mainly, but doing some tandem reads when I'm at home in the house as well, which I'm coming to really favour as a method of getting through books. I did the same with Inanna, by the way. I did forget to mention the narrator, Zira Jane Nakwi. She's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I found myself looking forward to listening to the audiobook more than I usually would, just because of her expert and very enjoyable narration. So,
Part 1. In the first days, in the very first days, in the first nights, in the very first nights, in the first years, in the very first years. From the ancient Sumerian poem, The Hulupu Tree. Chapter 1. Inanna. In Athens, they call me Aphrodite now. In Babylon, they call me Ishtar. But in the first days, I had only one name, Inanna.
that's what I've got going on there. There's my usual pile. Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. I'm at page 242, so not quite halfway. I was hoping, and I had committed to, reading one book from the realm of the Elderlings every month until I got through them all. This is the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy, which makes it the 7th book in the whole realm of the Elderlings series. And it's the first month that I haven't completed a book. So I was getting a bit overwhelmed, I think, reading too many things and slipping behind on some of my creative pursuits. So I basically decided to slow down, and that's what I've done. So I'll be reading this over 2 months and maybe even more. We'll see how it pans out, because I've got my Odyssey and I've got my Plato stuff to write, and I've also got my Crime and Punishment, another read-along that I'm doing over on my Substack. We're coming up to halfway. I'm going to read a chapter of that today and get an article out, hopefully by the end of today. Probably another video actually, same as I did last week, because I find that a good way of getting through the mental blocks of writing content. So, Akhmatova, you'll know that I'm doing a poetry reading from that every week. So I've got that going on. I've got The White Guard, which I was going to read in tandem with The Russian, which I have here. That has kind of stalled, so it needs to be a very slow read in order for me to read it with The Russian. But I want to do it, so I'm not quite sure how I'll fit that in. And I've also got Lord Phil's Bane, which I'm recording a podcast about with my friend Barge. And I think we've got 2 more chapters to do. We took a break over summer because we were both busy and travelling, so it became too much of a challenge to get the podcast episodes recorded. But we're hoping to pick that up again this week or next week. So if you've been following along with that, yeah, they should be recommencing very soon. Don't know if we'll continue when we finish the first book. We'll have to chat about that and I'll get back to you. Right, that was my wrap up for September 2024. Thanks for watching. See you later.